Hi, thanks for joining and welcome to the podcast. My name is Carolyn, and throughout today's episode, I'll be discussing the current difficulties that come along with the involvement of youth sports. As a D1 athlete myself, sports have always been a part of my life. Many kids start out in sports at a very young age, but very few continue on to the collegiate level. I wanted to take a deeper dive into something I love and look at why participation numbers drop off at such a young age. After some investigating, I learned that a lot of this has to do with the cost of participation. It seems that at a young age, kids are involved in everything. Parents are anxiously running their kids around from t-ball to soccer practice. All of this chaos continues for a few years, but then gradually fades away. Instead of kids being involved in 3 different sports, it narrows itself down to 1, and then eventually to no sport at all. By age 13, approximately 70% of youth have dropped out of sports, according to a statistic by Lisa Black in 2024. This statistic might be shocking, but it also might start to bring back some memories of you as a kid and your team numbers dwindling as you got older. Why is this? Well, a large portion of this percentage is due to the increasing cost in participation in youth sports. How do financial barriers prevent youth from continuing to participate in sports? Well, this participation comes at a cost, and a high one. According to Roman Stubbs, a Washington Post journalist, it can cost on average approximately $900 per year per kid to participate in youth athletics. Now, this might give a better reasoning of why in middle school all your friends are suddenly quitting the team, or why you didn't even continue yourself. Luckily, there are current trusts and funds and organizations that have been created to hope of easing this cost, but more can and should be done. Participating in sports at a young age is extremely important and has proven to be valuable. By participating in sports, kids have learned important skills like teamwork, a strong work ethic, and create bonds with friends. All of this increases health physically and mentally, according to Mayo Clinic study in 2023. Many factors contribute to the financial barriers, and coming up will be more details and information on it all. So I think it's important to start by talking about where and when this issue really began. To really answer the question of what financial barriers are currently in place, it's important to see how this started to grasp the situation. Back in 2008, when the stock market crashed, it left the economy in a frenzy, including a lasting impact on schools, according to some financial analysis done later in 2014. As a result, public schools were left to make financial cuts to lessen their burdens. So, sports teams' funding was cut. This was seen in a variety of ways. In some cases, sports were cut altogether. Other outcomes were cuts in equipment provided, as well as less time to access facilities. Out of all the families impacted, students from schools with lower socioeconomic status were impacted the most. Here's why. When resources had become scarce, many kids and their families turned to club sports and travel teams to provide better opportunities. These travel teams offer kids the opportunities for better competition, equipment, facilities, all with the hope of getting noticed by college scouts, according to the Washington Post in 2021. While many families hopped on this bandwagon, it left some in the dust, those being the families that weren't able to afford the costly teams. For kids that aren't able to financially commit to the travel teams, they're left to participate in community athletics or at their public schools, the ones that got their budgets cut. Some might suggest that these are still legitimate places to be competitive in sports, yet the results don't pan out that way. When students who train with club teams and students who train at community centers compete against each other, the difference is painfully obvious. Whether it be the difference in quality of equipment or gap in score on the scoreboard, it's obvious that those who can overcome the costly barrier of youth competitive sports are the ones who stick it out. Throughout my time competing competitively in sports, I remember in elementary school, specifically track, there were times where it was painfully obvious which kids had the financial resources and which ones didn't. Just take a look around. Whenever the latest Nike Spike shoe came out, lots of kids rushed to the store to get them. However, when lined up on the track, there would always be some kids wearing shoes with holes or the soles of the shoes coming out. This is just one example of many where the wealth gap became obvious in sports and eventually would cause many to quit. While there are direct financial barriers that prevent kids from playing in sports, such as equipment, travel expenses, etc., there are also some forms of cost that are less recognized but just as prevalent and costly in the world of athletics. One part of sports that is highly emphasized to gain improvement is recovery. Some forms of recovery are basic and simple, such as stretching, fueling, and resting. However, another type of recovery is recovery from an injury. Many people might overlook this as an impacting participation in sports. Yet, what they don't realize is that recovering from an injury can be very costly and could ultimately be another financial barrier keeping kids out of sports. According to PanDiet 2021, households with lower forms of healthcare, such as Medicaid, had the lowest participation in sports. Earlier this week, I interviewed someone who had a direct experience in this topic, my mom. Over my years of participating in sports, there have been a wide range of medical costs associated with my participation. To learn more about this, I interviewed my mom. So it's now clear how financial barriers prevent youth from participating in sports. Whether that be the cost of equipment to lack of medical resources, youth sports are becoming less accessible. Luckily, other people have recognized this and are trying to do something about it. Alright everyone, today I'm here with my mom, and she's had 2 daughters, including me, participate in sports from elementary school throughout high school and even college. So I wanted to get some more insight on the specific costs that come along with competing in sports.
Thanks, Carolyn. I guess I would categorize the costs in kind of two separate categories. There's like the costs that you expect and they tell you about up front. And those are going to be things like, what equipment are you going to need? What shoes or suit or special equipment you might need to participate in sports. There are going to be some dues probably if you belong to a club sport. And there may be some expenses if you're going to compete in certain events, entry fees and that type of thing. And then there'll be travel and that goes along with that. But a lot of the expenses that come up that you don't plan for kind of relate to if there's an unexpected injury that your athlete suffers. And sometimes that can be, if there's some pain or something that they first get. For swimmers, a lot of times that will be in the shoulders because they use their shoulders a lot for swimming. And if you don't know what the pain is or what's causing it, then there can be a whole series of doctors that you go to get that diagnosed. Usually you have to start off with your primary care doctor, your pediatrician, and then get a referral. And then oftentimes there's x-rays involved. And so then the x-rays are a separate referral. You might get referred then to a sports specialist, and that person might be able to diagnose what needs to happen. And of course, every step along the way is an additional charge to visit each of those doctors. And then, of course, there's the treatment that they would prescribe. Could be shots. It could be physical therapy. Sometimes it could even be surgery, depending on what the injury might be. Hopefully, there's nothing broken. There doesn't need to be any, pins put in or casts or that, but sometimes that happens. And other times there's months of physical therapy that has to be gone through, and then there can be an expense for each of those steps along the way too. So I guess I would say one of the biggest unexpected expenses that goes along with having a student in sports is a lot of the medical care that can go along with that.
All right, thank you. It's clear that sports have many positive impacts for kids. From sports, kids are able to build social skills as well as improve physically and mentally. By participating in sports, kids are able to develop social skills such as communication with each other and learn about the importance of teamwork. They are also able to improve their physical health to gain mobility and coordination, which is valuable as a kid. Lastly, sports offer kids a mental outlet, which helps lower anxiety and stress. All of this research is thanks to Mayo Clinic's study. So it's clear how vital it is for kids to participate in sports and that this opportunity needs to be preserved. Many people have come together and created different organizations to help kids have athletic opportunities. There's a list created of mini grants by Porter in 2024, and some of these grants include All Kids Play and Good Sports. Because of these, kids are able to have the financial resources necessary to pursue their love of athletics. Today, we started with how the economic crisis in 2008 caused a domino effect, impacting society today. While the economic crash approximately 16 years ago left many people devastated, it impacted some more than others. This crisis hurt all, but it specifically hurt those with less. While the day-to-day impacts have since vaporized, it left a mark on other organizations, groups, and businesses, specifically public schools. From the crash, schools had to cut funding. However, wealthy schools were given more money to work with, which meant they made less cuts. As a result, this furthered a division and wealth gap between schools. Much of this has stemmed from educational inequity. Education inequity is when funding, schools, and other supplies are not equally distributed across schools. As a result, some students are left with less than their peers at the neighboring schools. This idea is not only limited to the academic setting, but applied to the athletic one as well. Schools with less funding were not able to provide as many athletic opportunities in school sports as the others who did have the funding. This is backwards from what it should be. These schools that were cutting sports were at the schools where kids needed it most. It was at these schools where the students couldn't join a flashy, expensive travel team. Sports is just one example of a bigger problem: educational inequity. While this is disheartening, I want to leave you with something positive, of something good. Many famous athletes were able to overcome the financial barriers that are in place. Not only did they make it, but some made it big. In just the NBA, some players who made it are Caron Butler and LeBron James. Now, these may be popular names, but what you might not know is that Butler grew up in a rough neighborhood and was in and out of juvenile detention throughout his youth. Eventually, he discovered his love for basketball in high school and earned a scholarship to the University of Connecticut, which then led his way to the NBA. LeBron was born to a single teenage mother and moved around in his youth. Eventually, he moved in with his football coach at age 9 and then discovered his love for sports, and his journey began from there. While the sports world isn't perfect, it's improving, and people have made it. So I hope you enjoyed listening. Thanks for joining in. See you next time.